That sounds exciting. Well, welcome everyone. It's so good to see you today. Thank you so much for joining us for our program. And we've got quite a few folks here, which is awesome. And I'm sure we'll get some more trickling in. If it's your first time, I don't think it's anybody's first time, but if it is, welcome to our program. And if you've been supporting this program, thank you so much. You all are so faithful. You attend, I know, as much as you can. So thank you again for that. Love it. So we will go right ahead and jump in because today we are going to be talking about Charles Dickens. Specifically, we'll be talking about one of his early works, Oliver Twist, and then his final unfinished work, The Mystery of Edwin Drude. So it became a real mystery because he never finished it. And we'll get a chance to talk about that. But as always, first, now, this is interesting, Andrew, because I think I had in my head the type of background that you were going to have for a Charles Dickens themed week, but this is different than what I would have thought, which is fine. Okay, so let's try to figure out where is Andrew, and I'm sure Daniel's somewhere around there too.
He's the ghost of brothers present. He's there.
That's awesome. I don't know how y'all do that. That's great.
Where are you?
Well, I'm somewhere across the pond, and it is a public library.
Okay.
Those are the two big hints.
Okay.
And there is, of course, the Charles Dickens connection.
Yes. So we're in England, of course. But I'm gonna say that it's not in London.
It is the London area.
Oh, it's a London area. Okay. It's a public library.
It's obviously a very modern building, so
yes.
It doesn't look like the new British Library, so it's peculiar looking, and it wouldn't be that nice looking.
Well, the when I think of England, there are three words, and I guess I think of like, well, we already said it's in the London area. Does the name of the library have Oxford or Cambridge in it?
No, but it does have Harvard.
Oh, okay. So it has the name Harvard in it.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to say it's some kind of first name, Harvard Public Library.
It is the John Harvard Library.
Ah!
It is on the site of Marshalsea Prison, where Dickens' father was held. It was a debtor's prison.
Oh my gosh, wow.
The prison was demolished in the 1870s, and today the site is a library. And it is named after Harvard's founder.
John Harvard, yes.
Whoa, that is so cool. Andrew, sometimes I wonder if you like have some kind of crazy ability to peek at my notes before because this is perfect. Wow, that is so cool. And who would have thought it would have been turned, like the area where the debtor's prison was, would have been turned to a library of all places. Wow, that's so cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then, okay, Andrew gave us the handout in the chat, so feel free to download that. Oh, and Michelle, yay, it is your first time. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We're so happy to have you. Okay, wonderful. So that was really cool. Thank you, Andrew. So we are going to go ahead and get into our topic. Again, Charles Dickens. So as most of us probably know, Charles Dickens is basically a behemoth in English literature, especially during the 19th century, and he still is today, of course. He one of my favorite booksellers in London, Tamara actually went there, Peter Harrington Rare Books. They surmise that during his peak, Dickens was not only the most famous novelist, but also the most famous person in the world, which is a really bold statement. I don't know if that's true or not, but it does speak to how famous and how much of a celebrity he was during that time. So I'm going to go ahead and ask, has anyone read the two books that or one of the two books, or both, that we're going to be talking about today? Has anyone read Oliver Twist? Or has
Yes.
you read it? Has anyone read The Mystery of Edwin Drood?
Yes.
I haven't read that one. Has anyone seen any movie adaptations of either one?
Yes.
Yeah.
And television adaptations.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Television adaptations. So I have a confession. I'm going to be transparent. You know that I love to lead these meetings, but I have not read either of those books in their entirety. I read parts of
Ellen Williams.
I know. I'm see? I know, but let me explain myself. There's a reason behind this. So I have read my introduction to Charles Dickens came through Great Expectations. So I did read that in its entirety. So like I said, it was my introduction to Charles Dickens, and it also served as my conclusion to Charles Dickens for a very long time. And again, I think I was like a 9th grader or something. So as you can imagine, if any of you have ever read Great Expectations, or if you've ever seen it, I think for me, I was like, he won't stop talking.
Yes.
Why does he write so much? So I literally remember being like at my parents' house upstairs in my room and just trying to make it through another chapter. So again, I think that was what I thought, when I was young about Charles Dickens. So, but as you all know, along with you all, I've been rediscovering all these different pieces of classic literature. So Chuck and I are working on our relationship. I'm going to give him another chance. So I'd love to hear, does anyone, for those of you who have read Oliver Twist or The Mystery of Edwin Drood or any Charles Dickens piece, maybe like A Christmas Carol, something like that, or seen any renditions, what are your impressions? And what do you think about, what comes to mind, anything like that? Are there fond memories involved? What do you think about when you think of Charles Dickens and his works?
I'm just going to jump in. You knew that. I was going to just let me jump in. I like Charles Dickens. Not many people in the 21st century relate to the way he writes, because he writes extemporaneously, as if he were talking. He was an actor as well as a lecturer and a performer on the stage. And his stories are written that way. Probably Charles Dickens used an outline when he was thinking about the book, but he lost it almost, as Oliver Twist, almost at once. Every week he wrote a new episode for, as Tammy and I were talking yesterday about the Bradburys and the railroads and the stationery shops. Every week people would line up, or as they say in Britain, queue up, and I mean sometimes 100 people long in a railroad station to try to buy the latest edition of the installment of Oliver Twist. As he wrote, he would change his mind. And since I think he wrote out of stream of consciousness, when he wrote his books, they become like life. You go a little bit here, you go a little bit over there, you forget your emphasis there, you add a new emphasis over here. Now, 21st century people will say this: shut up and get to the chase. I happen to like the yapping. I like talking and the characters and the backgrounds and things. But the most important thing about Oliver Twist is the second book. He wasn't quite certain that it was going to go well. So he responded to public reaction to it. But what he did was revolutionary, people. It was without a doubt a great social change. If he had been in the 21st century, he would have changed the world toward race, sexism, religion. When he wrote about Oliver, it is heartrending. People were so accustomed to the poor being poor and put down and used and abused. So when poor Oliver asked Mr. Bumble, "Please, sir, may I have some more?" and he had beaten for it, it made tears throughout the city of London and throughout the British Isles. It changed the world. And there are certain things in this book that just make me want to cry every time I read it. When Oliver, and this is Charles Dickens, he just, I think, stepped on it, looked at it, wrote about it, and got out of the way. One of the first jobs that Oliver was about to be sold into was the chimney sweep. He begs the master, do not do it to me. It's my death sentence. And he wins that one. It's one of the few he wins. We forget that people use tiny children, emaciated, starved to half to death, to climb up through flues to clean out the soot so the house wouldn't catch a fire. Those flues were so convoluted and so narrow that the children had to be, a 5-year-old was probably no bigger than a thin 2-year-old. And if they got stuck, they didn't call fire department. They let them die in the flue and lit the fire so they would rot and let the smoke go up. So when he tells that one, I am so horrified with that particular element of it. And then there's the other one. It makes my fingers hurt when he talks about it. Today, we don't relate to it. Joel, this is natural in the 21st century, not to understand the agony of children and the poor. He went to work in the oakum factory. That sounds so strange to us, oakum. And it has a double meaning for Chaucer, because London was one of the most filthy cities on the face of the planet. They were just beginning to build sewers. But oakum was the root growth that's pulled apart to caulk wooden ship bottoms. And it takes very tiny hands, really tiny hands, to pull those fibers out. And you do it for 18 hours a day. And it's a backbreaking, stinking, nasty job. The other part was, and I think it's funny, is Dickens is also talking about the social mores of London of the 1830s, is because oakum was used in sewer pipes. When the two pipes were joined together, they packed it with oakum and then they filled it with lead. So poor Oliver had gone from the bad to the worst in this book. And then this is one of Dickens's, I have to be honest, we have to say Dickens is a nice man sometimes and a perfect pain in the butt in other times. He had some blind spots in him, and his most famous villain is a villain. He rivals anything Shakespeare ever did. He makes Richard III look sometimes nice, and that's Fagin. And he uses the term over and over and over, the Jew. And even in his own time, it was considered too heavy-handed. So when the book was being published, they tried to cut out that. But still, no, the word Jew comes in so much. And Fagin is a wicked man. Why is he wicked? He's a thief. He trains pickpockets and thieves. But he hounds, like Valjean in Les Miserables, he hounds Oliver because Oliver's trying to get away from him. And he's at the notion, I will control you if I have to kill you. And it's really, really a heart-rending issue. And it is a mouthful. They said to be one of the great progenitors, the first English child welfare law. The English people were about to raise up. They didn't pass a very good law on it, but at least, the first one comes along. And then there is the fairy tale element, Joel, that I think is, we all want to believe in it. We can be poor and believe that by good luck, we are related to somebody rich and prosperous and famous. And when all ends, we will get to be at the top. Well, it works that way in this book. But Dickens is really laughing at the middle classes. Because when he says that these poor people, Oliver was a legitimate child of a well-to-do person's wife. And it's funny how these people all come together so it works out for poor Oliver. But the fact is, when you read Oliver Twist, you sympathize with him. And it must have been revolutionary for them to read a book like this, which said, people you look down on might not be so looked down onable. I made a word up, Joel, down onable, but That's a Dickens word, isn't it? Let's add that to the Dickens because he made them up. But the fact is that he made it work, that you could say, identify with Oliver, but maybe every poor person on the street I spit on isn't really by their standards, low class.
I'm wondering if some of that comes from what I understand, his own personal experience, because I know that he kind of, I guess you could say, lived in both worlds a little bit.
Yes, he did.
Because when he was born, he was, I think they were okay. And then
they were the lower middle classes, yes.
Lower
but
middle
his father couldn't keep a penny.
Yeah. So when, as Andrew taught us, his dad was sent to debtor's prison. I think little Charles, he had to work in, was it Warren's blacking factory?
Oh, Tammy, do you know what that means? That's a death sentence for most people because there's lead in all that stuff and arsenic.
So he not only endured those horrific conditions, I think he was probably just, abused as well. So that kind of situation, I think he was there for 3 years and then he ended up having to go to school again, but that never left him. I mean, it traumatized him essentially.
Now, he used an Oliver or a David Copperfield moment. He became a court stenographer and a stenographer, which was today kind of like a computer geek because he could make a fortune or it'd be necessary to take down things. Because in this time, they would transmit all kinds of information via the telegraph. And so he rose up from his father's tenure. His father was not on the bottom of the social heap. His father was just inept. And one of the people who was, when you went to debtor's prison, you didn't go to debtor's prison. Your whole family went to debtor's prison.
I didn't understand. Because I realized that a lot of his family was taken away too. Oh, no.
Yes. And the other thing is, and this is what scares in this whole book of Oliver Twist, read it. Read it with this assumption. You're going to look at this idea with open eyes about poverty. People got sent to prison. And when you went to prison, if you're going to eat supper, you had to pay the jailer for your food.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So, and it was a miserable, sorry experience. And people preach in the pulpits. This was the right, God ordained this. Well, I got to say to people, Charles Dickens could talk or preach louder than many preachers, and he did in this book. And people felt sympathy for the poor. And let's just phrase it this way. He felt sympathy for the downtrodden.
Right.
And if anybody can be down, he's saying anybody can be downtrodden. And sometimes you're just lucky enough accident to meet your friends who happen to be connected to you and realize that you are actually the child of an heiress and you're going to have money. That I kind of gag on, but if you realize a world where most of the world is poor, that's a kind of good dream to have.
Absolutely.
And
we all kind of do that.
I want to mention, Joellen, about this is, and this is very important. We talked about this might be a little over heavy-handed for a young student. Yes, it is. But when these magazines came out every week or so, people bought them in the evening over an hour or two. They'd have a lamp lighting on a table, and father probably read that to his family out loud. And it was a little bit like having television or some story where everybody loved it. And they wanted to go next week, what's going to happen? And what Dickens is good about is, next week he probably was on some other part of the story without ever connecting to it. And so you had these long breaks that, you said life goes along with A, B, C, D, E. No, Dickens says it goes A, F, L, that way. So you have different people coming in, and he gets back on the original plot, and then he starts going somewhere else. And you realize sometimes he's making the story plot up as he goes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's get a little bit into his career because I want to talk about what you said about people reading these things, like episodes by the lamplight. I think that's really cool. So Dickens began his career as a journalist, and then in the 1830s, he was able to publish a series of sketches under the pseudonym Boz called Sketches by Boz. And then later he published this, around the same time actually, he published the serialized Pickwick Papers, which were a hit. But someone else mentioned this in the chat about his pieces being serialized. And I wanted to show you all, this is an example. We're not really like talking about the plot of this book too much, but Bleak House. We have the serialized version of Bleak House. We have the serialized version of Our Mutual Friend in our collection. I'm going to try to show this to you all on camera so you can see. I'm going to be very careful, but because it's kind of, okay. There, can you see that? These are all a bunch of serials.
Can you take one off so the group can see that? Just
I'm going to take one off, and then I have a picture. We can blow it up and see. So I guess this one was monthly because it says July, and you see how thin it is. It's pretty thin. But this is how, so it's kind of like what we're used to when watching TV episodes. This is kind of like what that was. Instead of waiting for the next episode of your favorite sitcom or anything, you would get this every month. And I think he did monthly more often than he did weekly. Is that right?
Occasionally he did a lot. When he did money, he got more out fast. But,
okay.
But people demanded them. Sometimes his books were so popular that they from this publisher, let's get another episode out now. And that's the reason his books sometimes are so wandering. Because he was having to hurry. But the other thing, we looked at those, if you look at those books, Joel, or those periodicals, one of the things Dickens is very, very good about is his people talking and his dialects. And so a person reading this, father was very likely, that sounds sexist, but maybe mother, but when he's reading it, they had these different dialects. So the person would father would say, well, he would make fun of somebody, or he would have make nasty. He would make it change their voices for Fagin. It was really interesting, and I think people learned to want to read. Now these are woodcut illustrations around this.
Oh wow!
The first book. Now this one is illustration by Brown for Bleak House. Mm-hmm. Brown did a number of these things for him. But George Cruikshank, probably the most important illustrator of the middle part of the 19th century, did the illustrations for Oliver Twist. And that little picture of Oliver holding the little bowl, wooden bowl, is considered to be one of the most important pictures in literature.
Absolutely. Let's see if I have any. I just wanted to show you all kind of what you would see in these serials. You'd see advertisements and whatnot, and we're going to get to some other images later, but I wanted to just show those up close. But I'm glad you mentioned the Cruikshank illustrations, because we're talking about Oliver Twist. The Oliver Twist actually first appeared in I think between 1837 and 1839, and is it called, I think it's pronounced Bentley's Miscellany, I believe.
Miscellany, yes.
Miscellany, okay. Miscellany, and it's funny, we actually have that in our collection. I just didn't want to, it's on display right now in an exhibit, and I didn't want to pop off the I was nervous to pop off the this the glass door where it is. So but we have it, and I'm going to feature it in my upcoming exhibit, the Oliver Twist. But let me show you an example though of a different volume of Bentley's Miscellany that wasn't on display. We've got some so I guess what they would do, from what I understand, because Bentley's Miscellany would probably come serialized, of course, and then I guess eventually everybody, would it be up to you, the owner, to get them bound in a nice way. So I really like this binding, and it has marbled edges. So when we look in it, here's an example of this title page, Bentley's Miscellany, and it has illustrations. But as Mr. Williams mentioned, for Oliver Twist, which was first published in there, George Cruikshank did the illustrations. And Morgan, I don't know if you have any, do you have any extra info on Charles Dickens and his relationship with Bentley's Miscellany?
I didn't find much, but there was something that said like that his relationship with some of like the other people working at the Bentley Miscellany is that they kind of described him as like not being very honest and always asking for like more money and saying that like everybody's profiting off of his works except for him. So I thought that was kind of something interesting.
Richard Bentley, the Bentley family were the largest printers of books and periodicals in Britain. And they were the big, but Dickens fell out with him because over money. And he created his own periodical called Household Words, and then all the year round.
It's kind of funny. This seems to be a theme, because I think we mentioned this with Mark Twain too. He fell out with his publishers and made his own publishing company.
If you notice that publishers today are doing the same thing, first writers are breaking away from them because publishers are not giving enough royalties. One of my favorite books by John Maddox Roberts, he won't write any more books because the publisher doesn't give him enough royalties on it. They want him to, because everybody wants the next book, they've got a million bestseller list, but he won't give them one because now that's two people fighting, and which one wins, I don't. The one who will win will be Amazon somewhere.
Absolutely. So yeah, I know that's kind of where we are now with that. Very interesting. So one thing that I noticed about, we generally, when we talk about Oliver Twist, we just say Oliver Twist because we all know what we're talking about. But the actual title, the full title is Oliver Twist, or The Parish Boy's Progress. Now, is it just me, or I just like thought of this, is that kind of a reference to The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan? Because I had someone ask me, yeah, I had someone recently ask me about that book, and we have, copies in the collection, but that's like that book is from like 1678.
Yes, but you're quite right. That is give Joellen a double gold star. That is a real big plus. Scholarship is built, there must be 200 books built on that topic.
Interesting. Okay, so that makes sense. So I never actually knew that was the full title of Oliver Twist, which is interesting.
Can I give you a joke?
Yes.
Charles Dickens could not think of a title for his book, Oliver Twist. He just really could not get a good title. So you just really frustrating. So he went into a bar one day and he said he'd have a martini. And the bartender says, Oliver Twist. Now you know that's a terrible English teacher joke, isn't it? And Yvonne, you've heard me tell that to the group too. So, that is not true. That's made up. Don't quote me.
Oh, that was great. I'm so glad these meetings are recorded.
Oh, put your thumb on that button, erase.
Oh, that is awesome. That is so funny. I needed that this morning. So it's, as Mr. Williams was saying about Oliver Twist, it can really, and I think this is why I am going to definitely read this one. It can really kind of hit you right here in the heart. Now, one thing that really got me, and I can find it, I think. I have it, I guess I typed it up here. But this is the passage that is just so sad, when I think the passage that we all kind of know, when Oliver is asking for some more because he's still hungry, and he's in the orphanage. So anyway, I'll read it, and it just kind of gets you. So we've got Oliver, who first was, I think he was born in a workhouse, actually.
Yes.
And his mom died, I guess, in childbirth, maybe?
In childbirth.
In childbirth, which is terrible. And so then Oliver spends most of his time in this orphanage, and they mistreat him and they don't feed him. So here it goes. But him and a bunch of other boys are here. The evening arrived. The boys took their places. The master, in his cook's uniform, stationed himself at the copper. His pauper assistants ranged themselves behind him. The gruel was served out, and a long grace was said over the short commons. The gruel disappeared. The boys whispered to each other. They winked at Oliver, while his next neighbors nudged him. Child as he was desperate with hunger and reckless with misery. He rose from the table and, advancing to the master, basin and spoon in hand, said, somewhat alarmed at his own temerity, please, sir, I want some more. The master was a fat, healthy man, but he turned very pale. He gazed in stupefied astonishment on the small rebel for some seconds, and then clung for support to the copper. The assistants were paralyzed with wonder, the boys with fear. What? Said the master at length in a faint voice. Please, sir, replied Oliver, I want some more. And it just goes downhill from there. But it's just, it does kind of get you, because, you know, I think about my own daughter, she's always asking for more, seconds and thirds.
And the awful thing, Joellen, was that not only this, follow up this, the orphanage sells him off to, or going to sell him off to the chimney sweep. And he was able to convince the magistrate not to do that to him. But it just is a really heartrending story. And if you never really faced what life is like outside your own household, and most people do not know what, you assume where the world is where you are. This is an eye-opener, a big eye-opener. And that's where Dickens was so popular. He could read this out loud on the stage. And he could play every part perfectly. And people would stand in line to hear him read for 2 hours or 3 hours. It's, these books are not just to be read. Actually, I don't think they're meant to be read silently. I think they should be read out loud. You'll get a sore throat if you do that. But the other thing is that while they were episodes, he published the book, the finished book, but it wasn't finished. He published it 3/4 through the monthly series. And then it had not been finished. So he was forcing people to buy the hardbound without an ending until he wrote the ending for the monthly issues.
Oh my
He was a
goodness.
good businessman in that respect, yes.
Yeah.
He could hook you.
Wow. I can't be mad at him though. I mean, he got people that were waiting for it. So can't be mad at him.
And you notice one thing in all his books. Now, people don't often say this, but you've got to pay attention to it. How many unhappy marriages are in Oliver Twist or in Edwin Drude? There are so many men and women who are at each other's throats. Mr. Bumble was that way. These people had miserable marriages. Not everybody, but they, and that I think is always a fact because Dickens's marriage was miserable.
Oh.
And he took up the Ellen Tierney, a famous actress. Today we feel sorry because we're a little bit censorious, I guess, in the world today. But yes, Dickens was a philanderer too. But I think there's some things in Dickens when he was having a bad moment at home, he wrote about how people couldn't get along with each other. And most of the men had miserable experiences with their talk-backing wives.
Interesting. So yeah, so it just seems like he puts a lot of personal experience in his,
very much.
A lot of that. I wanted to show just a few more images from our collection, just to show this is one of these books that we can safely say has just like never been out of print. So it's printed and been published by many different publishers, and we've got different people let me see if I can, okay. We've got different people have illustrated, these are different illustrations. So
there's a Fagin. I'd be honest, they're over the top.
Yeah, I see. And then, so this one was Household Edition. I don't know, that's referring.
Now, Household Edition, what was being published for Dickens. That was it. The household editions were
Household
his.
Weekly magazine that he did.
Yes.
Okay, so that one, and then we've got an American publisher there. There's another example. Now this one, I have to ask, why is this called The Adventures of Oliver Twist? That's like that's technically a different title.
Yeah, Twain on his novels made a number of changes, not only in titles, but in certain parts of the book. He began to try to clean up his stories. So it's just an effort to say, clean it up. The Adventures of, because we say Oliver Twist, but without a fancy English title, he had to make changes.
Oh, I see. That makes sense.
He made a lot of them. If one thing is relevant, he sometimes forgot who he was talking about in his stories. He had to go back and correct names and places.
Oh, okay. I see. Interesting. I didn't know that because I was really wondering that. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to talk about Edwin Drude. So this is really cool because we've got a first edition of The Mystery of Edwin Drude, and this is what it looks like with the this kind of, I guess, greenish yellow. It's really a greenish yellow, even though it looks totally green. Kind of this greenish yellow here. So this is interesting because Edwin Drude was also serialized and published in installments between, I think, April and September of 1870. So there was an anticipated 12 installments, but unfortunately, I think Dickens had he had a stroke or something, and then
He had a stroke and died. Yes, about halfway through the book. Yes. Yeah,
and died halfway through. So as you can see, it's kind of thin. It's thin because he never got to finish it. And so if you go in here and here's a very nice picture of Dickens for you. And the publisher, Chapman and Hall, and they published a lot of Dickens, I believe.
Yes.
They gave us this information in the beginning. They said, all that was left in manuscript of Edwin Drude is contained in the number now published, the 6th. And it goes on to say its last entire page had not been, written 2 hours when the event occurred, which one very touching passage in it, blah, blah, blah. So they kind of explain why it's not finished. But they felt like it was still something that they should publish, and they wanted to go ahead and just publish it as it was. Now, the cool thing is, this is literally a mystery. It's a murder mystery, basically, because the character, Edwin Drude, he's supposed to marry Rosa Budd, but they just aren't in love. So they break off their engagement. But then Edwin Drude disappears and nobody knows why. And where the main suspect is his jealous Uncle Jasper, but we don't know. So this fictional mystery has become like a real mystery because it never solved. So really, readers and writers have kind of tried to make up their own. Mr. Williams, when you were younger in school, did you make up
I had to do it. I was in college, undergraduate, I had to write one. And there's first off, let's just say, why did Dickens? It's the only mystery he ever wrote. He was a friend with Wilkie Collins, the most popular creator of mystery stories in the Victorian world. And he and Collins began to realize he needs to get modern. People began to criticize Dickens for being somewhat old-fashioned. You may think that Wilkie Collins is old-fashioned, but he was the front runner for the modern world of writing when he wrote his mysteries. So Dickens started this. Now, I like mystery stories. I've always liked them. When I was in college, there was no mystery story I would not inhale. And I used to think I can figure every book out. Well, you can't. But in Mystery of Edwin Drude, Professor said, Dr. Unthank said, now for your final, you have to write 6 chapters. They don't have to be long, but you have to have a story to end this novel. So I went through the book, and Joy Ellen, I think, now I don't know, I think that Charles Dickens gave us the clue, what he wanted to do. When he went down with Jasper into the church or the cathedral crypt, there is the quicklime pile. Now, quicklime will eat the human body up faster than nothing. And I think that Jasper killed him and dissolved his body in the quicklime, but he took his watch chain and watch and dropped it by the riverside so that people would think he was there and drowned or disappeared or something else. So I wrote mine out. I mean, I have to be honest, 120 pages. Professor laughed. I had the most convoluted story. And I made this up now. No one said it, but I said that Edwin Drude had a incisor that had been gold covered. Well, quicklime will not eat gold. So somehow they found that in there. So I thought that was the grandest thing. But then when I was in graduate school, we had to do the same dang thing again. This time I was tired of the mystery of the gold tooth. I made Rosa Budd the murderer.
Oh, you did? You
Yes.
changed it up.
Yes. So she had, because she was determined to have him and he was,
And you didn't.
wasn't, and she had some money. And I thought that would be a perfect way. So I wrote that technique. This used to be, when you were in school, did your professors ever make you write an ending to a book?
You know, I feel like maybe they asked us to write like an ending for maybe a short story, but I don't think we ever wrote an ending to like an actual.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, this one was one, it used to be, people would not take the Dickens class with Edwin Drude because they knew you're going to have to write, you got to use your creative fiction for it.
That's
I
fun.
loved it. I loved it. I just, I can do this good.
That's
Bad
exciting.
literature, Joella, bad literature, but fun.
You need to find those two endings.
I know
you
where they
wrote.
are, and they're going to be buried with,
No, I want to read it. I want to see it. That's really cool though. You had two endings. One of the crazy uncle, and one was the scorned lover. So that's a
So
great.
you have to write one now. Let's
Yeah.
have you write one.
I have to write one. It actually sounds really fun to me.
I've always thought that Lawless would be a good murderer too. You gotta throw it in where you don't expect.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to make sure I got a chance to talk to Lori because Lori has a couple things to tell us about, because we were talking about Dickens and his life. We talked about, you know, some of the content of his stories, but what about if you want to collect Dickens? Because based on the chat, we've got some folks who are fond of Charles Dickens, who have memories. So Lori, can you tell us a little bit about collecting Charles Dickens?
I would love to. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I have a new fancy headset. So my presentation is entitled David Copperfield or Why I Don't Collect Charles Dickens.
Ah.
Okay, because Charles Dickens to me is one of the hardest authors to collect, just because the publication is so prolific of his works in multiple countries. It's just there is a very small number of true first editions of his book, and for any purist collector, those are the ones you're going for. So once you accept that you may never in your lifetime have your hands on one of those grail books, then you realize, you know, you've got a million books to choose from for your collection. So then it really becomes kind of a matter of personal taste and personal preference. A couple of just factoids, fun trivia factoids. As Mr. Williams and Joy Ellen explained, he was a serial publisher. I personally think he was a marketing genius. Because Joy Ellen showed you some of the advertisements in the front of those weekly serials. He would actually sell ad space to competing authors.
Whoa.
In his books. And I don't know if you remember, there was I think in the 50s or 60s, somebody who didn't like Elvis Presley made buttons that says, "I hate Elvis," and he would sell those buttons to people, but people didn't stop to think he was making a fortune on making, you know, while still promoting Elvis. So same concept, you know, that his competitors were so vain that they were, and they knew that the public's demand for these serial publications was so strong. What better way to get your name in front of a potential reader than to be included in an ad in a Charles Dickens publication? So I really think he was brilliant in that regard. His goal, his sole purpose and mission was to get his work in the hands of as many people in as many formats as he possibly could. And he did not like the American publishers taking rights to publish his works over here. Those are not authorized,
Right.
or at that time they were not authorized. So he held great disdain for American publishers making money off of him, as previously mentioned. So the primary reason I other than money, that I can't collect first editions, is the list of first edition points, which is the governing document for any book of this type, is like a yard long. There are, for all of these books, because the publishers would each make generous changes, without actually talking to him. So you have to tick off all of those points, those first edition points, before you know whether you have an honest and true first edition of any of these works. And frankly, I not only do I not have the money to buy the real thing, I don't have the money to buy all the not real things in order to figure out if I have a real thing. So I tend to stick with the home library editions. I am an accidental or passive collector of Dickens. He happens to be in my library. He's not something that I've ever actively sought out to collect. But it was funny. I was telling my husband this morning, I knew I had at least one Dickens in my library at home, and I went and I found it, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I have another one, and then I have another one of all the same title. Okay, so David Copperfield, for show and tell today, I have brought 3 different modern versions of David Copperfield that are all quite different. They all hold very different value, but it's just to show that he's still highly collectible. It's just for different reasons now, and most of them are going to be highly personal to the collector. So I know we're limited on time, so I'm going to. Oh, and by the way, the auction record for another factoid for a Dickens novel was A Christmas Carol, sold in 2019. There were 2 premier collections of Dickens, and that was the William Self collection and the Dryden collection. And those have been parsed out through the years or sold, some sold in pretty big chunks. But there was a first edition association copy of A Christmas Carol that sold for almost $300,000 in 2019.
Stop.
So just so you know, so there is real money in collecting those fine first editions. They're just so scarce because he capitalized on loaning libraries. So when you hear of a Dickens book going straight, they would limit a publication run to, like, let's say 1,000. Usually it was 1,000 or less, and we're talking hardcover, okay, condensed versions. And they would put it in a lending library where it would get in the hands of the most people. And of course, those books ended up falling apart faster because they were handled so much. It's the private library ones that have come up that are worth so much. So, but yes, almost 300,000. And then for modern editions, for the home library, I brought 3, and lowest to highest value for purchasing. It's going to depend on the binding. So it's going to go from low to high. Hold on a sec. It will be smooth paper will be your least expensive. Then you're going to have cloth bindings. Heritage Press made a really nice cloth edition of his books. And I brought, oh, is my background gonna not show?
Well, I can kind of see it.
Yeah, let me, I wonder if it'll let me turn my background off real quick. I'm so sorry. I wasn't expecting to have a conflict. Okay, it may not. I'm so sorry. I was really wanting to show these to you. So anyway, it's, I don't think it's going to work, guys. Okay. So anyway, slip-covered edition. If I hold it right in front of me, it might work. Okay.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah.
All right. So cloth cover. Heritage Press was basically an everyman's collectible. It allowed regular people, middle-class people, to get the classics on their shelves. Okay. One thing I will tell you about Heritage Press is a lot of times the spines are prone to sunning. So even though they're in a slipcase, you may see a change in coloration between the spine and the board. A lot of them are going to have minor decorations like that gilt medallion. So that's the second step up from the bottom are the equivalent of Heritage Press. Now, I have a Franklin Press, which is, well, actually, the next step would be a leatherette version. And by the way, collectors, if you ever see the word leatherette, that means paper. That is not leather. So please remember that if you see it, because it makes it sound fancier than it is. But it's basically just usually a textured leather that kind of looks like a faux leather. I mean, a textured paper that looks like a faux leather. So just bear that in mind. Don't overpay for leatherette books because they're not real leather. So next step is faux leather, and this is a Franklin Press edition. Oh, sorry, there we go. That's better. A Franklin edition, Franklin Press edition, and you can see it's false leather, but it has really nice gilt work on it. It also has gilt, all edges gilt, which is something that most collectors are looking for. These books, a lot of people purchased just to have on their shelves to look smart, but they never read them. And these were part of a serial, and I just saw something interesting. Hold on, sorry. Oh, that's funny. There's a book plate hiding in there. I don't know if you can see it. But anyway, so if you ever have a chance to pick these up inexpensively, highly recommend it. You can absolutely read them. They don't have to stay perfect all the time. It's not a huge investment if you do want to use them as a reading copy. And then the last one I want to show you for home libraries is the Easton Press edition. And a lot of people are probably familiar with Easton Press. They do tend to fall into the lower end of the fine binding category. Again, more affordable than getting those early ones in the super fine bindings. But this one is a real leather binding with heavy, okay, sorry. There we go. Okay, real leather binding, heavy gilt. And this is a pretty big book. This book was installed in 20 installments when it was first published, so they put all of those together. But again, Easton Press, if you can get them inexpensively, just grab them. They look really good on the shelf. They're basically shelf candy. All of these books that I've shown you today are shelf candy. So they don't hold a huge collectible value, like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but some of these books, you know, can run a couple $100 if to the right buyer. So anyway, I think I have, and a gift copy of David Copperfield. Was also 2019 was a great year for book auctions and Dickens, was sold for approximately 150 USD. So it was like 110 pounds, and I think that converts over to about 150. So anyway, keep an eye out for them. They're nice to have, and I think he is an institution, and I think he is always going to be collectible.
Absolutely.
Lori, there's one other book you got to get to collect with. I haven't been able to find one, and that is the Revere binding, or Revere binders in the 1890s and 1900 with the Causeway binding, with the miniature painting.
I have an example of that in a photograph. Can I show that to the group real quick,
Yes.
Mr. Williams? Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
I love this.
I pulled this up just on the off chance that anybody would like to see it. So I'm going to. Is this showing up yet?
No.
No. Okay. Hold on. Let me hit. Oh, there we go. There's still one more button involved. Okay. Okay. So you can see that.
Wow.
This is an
yeah.
example of a Causeway binding for a Christmas Carol.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
I
have
just
a Causeway binding, but not for a Christmas Carol. That is,
No.
wow.
It is spectacular.
Yeah.
And this is a dream book. I mean, honestly, if I ever won the lottery, this is probably on my short list. So
Well, you're going to stand in line with me, because I may knock you off the line.
Oh,
There's
Mr.
another one.
Williams, I'll pick a copy up for you. You can just
Okay.
stay at home.
I want the one that there's a couple out there where Dickens is in his late life with his beard on, in his bearded picture on the covers. And
Yeah.
I just think they're lovely.
Oh,
but-
by the way, they're asking $32.5 for this one.
And that has gone up so much in
Oh,
the
it
last
has.
20 years.
There is the highest one right now for Dickens on ABE is running 75. That is
Yeah.
not a Causeway binding though.
Interesting.
Now, these Causeway bindings are absolutely.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
really are.
But Lori, I just had an epiphany.
What's that?
I know when you were showing the books and you get this ghosting on the cover there, when we couldn't see the books on them.
Yeah.
I'm going to write another chapter to the ending of Edwin Drude about ghosting. And I think we've got that you introduce a new way of having what happened to Edwin Drude. He comes back in a flickering ghost fashion.
Oh,
How about
That's actually a good idea.
oh my goodness.
Is
We
that-
will look forward to reading that, Mr. Williams.
Is that the Zoom edition of your book, Mr. Williams? The Zoom edition.
yes?
The Zoom.
And we're going. And my main character, my protagonist in that story will be Lori.
What?
And one thing I wanted to just answer Maureen's question, because where does the binders info appear? I have seen, I don't always find it, but when in some of the books in our collection, I have found like maybe on like the inside cover the paste down, like where I find like the binder will kind of have a signed name, or it'll have like maybe a gilt or embossed name of the binder.
Right.
I've seen that a couple times.
I'm trying to stop sharing.
That is a what's called a carriage trademark. People want that on their bindings, and they don't always do it, but they want it so that when anybody should see it, they'll be jealous that you got a named mark binding.
Yeah.
You know, why have something if you can't rub your neighbor's nose in it?
Absolutely.
So this is Kathy.
Hey,
So,
Kathy.
hey, so I have this. This is one of mine that I picked up. I don't know if I got it at a yard sale, but it's the 6th book where Collier's printed the works.
They did a series. In fact, they did
Yes.
multiple series. Yeah.
And I only
Yeah.
have the one book,
That's
but
okay.
I think this is embossed with the gold.
Yeah.
And
In guilt.
that's Dickens in the
That-
center.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I
that would be
think.
kind of like the one that Revere did with in a miniature painting.
Yeah. I bought it just because I liked it and
It's a
it was
pretty book.
Dickens. It's got 21 illustrations inside.
Oh, very nice.
That's lovely.
But
Joy Ellen, can you help me figure out how to stop sharing my screen?
Oh,
Oh, I found it. I
Oh, you
found it.
found
It was hiding. Okay,
Okay.
I got it.
no
There we
worries.
go.
You
Sorry.
see, Lori, there's your ghost again. There's
Yeah,
your
right.
ghost again. Here's what you want to call those when that happens. That's an Edwin Drude moment.
Yes, and Ed, we'll start saying that whenever anything weird happens, we'll be like, that was an Edwin Drude moment.
Can I get Drude on a vanity plate for my car? Say Drude.
That's good. I like that.
and it's interesting, that book is in that story is in this book that I have, and I had never heard about
You
it.
know, when Joellen was showing our copy, but the publisher decided to have various people over the years write endings for it. So everybody, the book is only half finished. You got to have somebody write it. I've never known anybody to write as good a one as I did.
You need to let us see it.
They're
That'll be
all
my
god
mission.
awful.
Funny.
They're all god awful.
No. Well, thank you all. Oh, Laura, did you have one more thing to say?
I was just going to try to answer Maureen's question.
Okay.
in the chat. She asked, where does the binders info appear in a book? Maureen, if it's the binders info is not always visible. Normally it'll have publisher's info, which is not always the printer or the binder. So if it's English, there's a good chance that there's a little sticker, a bookbinder sticker. Check on the inside of the rear board.
Yeah, that's what I found ours before.
Yeah.
If
it's somebody like, yeah.
if it's a
like
famous one like
Zanesdorf,
Seton or there are famous
they'll
bookbinders
put it on
in England.
on the front board.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen it
On the bottom
on
of the front.
both. Right.
Yeah, Revere or Zanesdorf, the big ones tended to mark they tended to mark theirs there because
Right.
it was easy there's a reason for that. It's simple. That if you're showing your book off and somebody's looking at it, you see automatically almost up front, oh, that's a custom bound book.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
So, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. This has been so informative. Thank you all for staying a little bit later because in normal Charles Dickens fashion, we had to go a little
I'm
longer.
sorry I talked too much today. I'm sorry. I talked too much.
This is exciting. I'm so glad. So it sounds like a lot of our group, we're all kind of inspired maybe to read some more Charles Dickens, read some things we haven't read before. So
Joylyn, I just got to say that maybe we could have one of our open houses online with everybody having a new chapter for Edwin Drude.
ooh, that would be kind of fun.
I think that would, everybody gets to write a different chapter without knowing what somebody else has written.
We'll call it Dickens flash fiction.
Yeah, that's essentially
Okay.
that's so cool.
I just think that really, when you start this, you get to develop a really new, strong feeling for Charles Dickens as a writer.
Yeah.
And then just to answer Maureen's question, I usually keep it a secret, but I will, I'll say this, we're going to be talking, we're getting into a new unit and it's going to be about writers and genres. So I will say that the novel we're going to be talking about is Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, but Tamara's going to be talking to us about something very particular that is featured in the novel. So I think it's going to surprise you a little bit. It'll be really fun. We're going to take like a different twist. We're not just going to talk about anyway, it's going to be kind of cool. So that's just a hint for next week. But thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you for talking about Dickens. This has been great. So everyone have a wonderful and safe week, and we will see you next Wednesday.
All right.
Bye.